Story number 1, Section K. I arrived at Clearwater Hills Psychiatric Hospital at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning in October of 2019. The facility was due for its annual unannounced compliance inspection, standard procedure for maintaining state licensure. I had conducted similar reviews at 43 behavioral health facilities over the previous 14 years. The drive up from Albany took 2 hours and 18 minutes. The administrator met me in the lobby within 3 minutes of my arrival. Her name was Dr. Patricia Voss. She had worked at Clearwater Hills for 11 years, according to the personnel files I reviewed later. She seemed prepared for the inspection, which was not unusual, though the facility had received no advance notice. She offered coffee and asked if I needed anything before beginning the documentation review. I declined both. I started with patient records in the administrative wing. The filing system was adequate. Medication logs showed proper documentation. Staff credentials were current and appropriately filed. I noted 2 minor deficiencies in the incident reporting procedures, standard issues that would require written correction plans. By 11:30, I had completed the records review and informed Dr. Voss I would need to tour all treatment areas, including the secure units. She hesitated before responding. She explained that the 3rd floor secure ward was undergoing renovations and suggested I could defer that portion of the inspection to the following month. I informed her that state regulation required examination of all patient care areas during the annual review. She said she understood and made a phone call before leading me to the elevator. The 3rd floor was quiet. The hallway showed no signs of construction or renovation. The flooring was standard institutional tile, worn but intact. The lighting was adequate. I counted 12 patient rooms along the main corridor. Dr. Call. Voss walked slightly ahead of me, moving at a pace that seemed intended to discourage detailed observation. I stopped at each door to verify occupancy and basic safety compliance. Room 307 was the 7th door on the left side. Through the observation window, I saw a patient sitting on the bed. The room appeared standard. Single bed, small desk, private bathroom, visible through an open door. The patient was wearing grey clothing. I could not determine age or gender from that distance. I noted that the room was designated for continuous observation based on the monitoring equipment mounted above the door. I walked to the nursing station at the end of the hall. The monitoring station showed 12 screens, 1 for each room. The screen labeled 307 displayed the same view I had seen through the window. The patient sat motionless on the bed. I asked the nurse on duty for the observation log. She looked at Dr. Voss before responding. She said the log was with the charge nurse who was at lunch. I waited. Dr. Voss made another phone call. The charge nurse arrived 14 minutes later. She provided the observation log. I reviewed the entries for room 307. The last entry was dated 4 days prior, a routine notation about meal delivery. There were no entries for the previous 72 hours. I asked why a patient under continuous observation had no recent documentation. The charge nurse said she would need to check with the previous shift. I informed her that I would need the complete patient file for room 307. Dr. Campus. Voss accompanied me back to the administrative wing. The records clerk took 18 minutes to locate the requested file. When she provided it, I saw immediately that it documented a discharge. The patient in room 307 had been released 6 weeks earlier on August 23rd. I pointed out that I had just observed someone in that room. Dr. Voss reviewed the file and said there must be a filing error. She asked the clerk to verify the current census. The clerk confirmed that room 307 was listed as unoccupied. I returned to the 3rd floor alone. Dr. Voss had remained in the administrative wing to investigate the discrepancy. The hallway was empty. I walked directly to room 307 and looked through the observation window. The patient was no longer on the bed. The figure stood near the far wall facing away from the door. I watched for approximately 2 minutes. The figure did not move. Then it was at the bed again, sitting in the same position I had first observed. I had not seen it cross the room. I tried the door handle. The door was secured with a lock I had not encountered in any previous inspection. It was institutional grade, heavy steel, with a digital keypad and what appeared to be a biometric scanner. This type of security exceeded standard behavioral health requirements. I knocked on the door. There was no response from inside. Dr. 1. Voss appeared at the end of the hallway with 2 security officers. She walked toward me at a measured pace. She explained that room 307 was currently restricted due to environmental concerns and that she would be happy to provide any additional documentation I required off-site. I informed her that state inspection protocol did not permit off-site document review for occupied patient rooms. She said the room was not occupied. I gestured toward the observation window. She did not look through the window. She said that the monitoring system had been malfunctioning and that what I had observed was likely a video loop from previous occupancy. I pointed out that I had watched the figure move. She repeated that the room was unoccupied and requested that I conclude my inspection. One of the security officers positioned himself between me and the door to room 307. I completed my inspection at 2:45 that afternoon. I documented multiple critical violations, including falsified patient records, inadequate observation protocols, and improper use of restraint-level security measures. I filed my report recommending emergency license suspension pending investigation. The report was submitted through the standard electronic system at 4:30 that same day. My division director called me at 8:20 the following morning. He said he had reviewed my report and had concerns about several findings. He asked if I was certain about the observations I had documented. I confirmed that I was. He said that the facility had provided additional documentation that clarified the issues I had identified. He instructed me to amend my report to reflect standard deficiencies only. I asked what additional documentation had been provided. He said it was under review by the legal department and that I should proceed with the amended report. I submitted the amended report on October 24th. Clearwater Hills received a provisional license requiring quarterly monitoring. The follow-up inspections were assigned to a different inspector. I reviewed her reports through the electronic system. All subsequent inspections showed satisfactory compliance with no significant deficiencies. I was reassigned to nursing home inspections in the Southern District 3 weeks after my visit to Clearwater Hills. The reassignment was described as a departmental restructuring. I requested clarification about the status of my original report. I was told that the matter had been resolved and the file was closed. I checked the state database last month. Room 307 is still listed as unoccupied. The facility maintains full licensure and has received no citations since my inspection. My original report is no longer accessible through the standard electronic system. Story number 2. Perimeter check. I arrived at the research station on a Thursday morning in late September to conduct the quarterly soil and groundwater contamination assessment following standard EPA protocols for agricultural test sites. The drive had taken just under 3 hours from Des Moines, and the facility looked exactly as it had during my previous visit in June, a cluster of prefabricated buildings, greenhouse structures, and approximately 40 acres of test plots arranged in numbered grids. The air smelled like turned earth and diesel exhaust from a tractor idling near the equipment barn. The station manager, Dr. Reeves, met me at the main office with the site access logs and contamination history files. She seemed tired and mentioned that 2 graduate researchers had resigned suddenly the previous week, citing personal reasons, and that fieldwork in the western plots had been suspended without explanation. I asked if there had been any spills or equipment failures. She said no, but that the students had complained about headaches and difficulty sleeping in the on-site housing. I made a note to check the ventilation systems during my walkthrough. I began sampling in Grid 7, which had been treated with experimental nitrogen-fixing bacteria the previous spring. The soil appeared normal, dark, loamy, with good structure, but during initial sampling, I noted that soil temperatures at 30 centimeters depth were reading 11 degrees higher than ambient, despite no thermal activity or decomposition present. I took readings at 5 different points across the grid. All showed the same anomaly. I checked my thermometer against a calibration standard. It was accurate. At approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, I observed that my sampling auger would not penetrate beyond 40 centimeters in multiple locations, meeting resistance that felt neither like bedrock nor clay hardpan. The sensation through the handle was strange, almost elastic, as though I were pressing against something that pushed back. I moved to a new location 6 meters east and encountered the same resistance at the same depth. I tried a third point. Same result. I returned to the office and consulted the geological survey maps. The area was listed as glacial till over Mississippian limestone, with bedrock at approximately 12 meters. There should have been no subsurface obstruction at 40 centimeters. Dr. Reeves was not in the building. I found her assistant, a man named Cole, who told me she had gone home early with a migraine. I requested ground-penetrating radar equipment from the regional office, but was instructed to complete visual and chemical sampling only and file my report by end of business Friday. The voice on the phone was someone I did not recognize, not my usual coordinator. When I asked why GPR was unavailable, I was told the equipment was allocated elsewhere and that my sampling protocol did not require subsurface imaging. I completed the chemical sampling from the accessible soil layers and moved on to the irrigation well at the southern edge of Grid 7. The well was a standard agricultural type, 6-inch casing, approximately 60 meters deep according to the site records. While collecting water samples from the irrigation well at dusk, I heard a low-frequency vibration that caused nausea and disorientation, though no machinery was operating on site. The sound was not quite a sound. It was more a pressure in my chest and inner ear. I stepped away from the well and the sensation faded. I approached again and it returned. I checked the wellhead for mechanical issues. The pump was off. The casing was intact. I lowered a weighted tape to check the water level and felt the line go slack at 51 meters, 9 meters higher than it should have been. I pulled the tape up and found the weight missing. The line severed cleanly as though cut. I returned to Grid 7 after dark with a handheld seismograph from my vehicle and recorded rhythmic subsurface movement at intervals of approximately 40 seconds, origin depth uncertain. The movements were small, barely registering but consistent. I set the seismograph to record and walked the perimeter of the grid. The pattern held across the entire area, roughly 2 hectares. I stood in the center of the grid and felt the ground beneath my boots, solid and still, but the seismograph showed the pulses continuing. I contacted my supervisor at 11:30 that night and was told to cease all sampling, secure my equipment, and leave the site immediately without filing a preliminary report. I asked if there was a safety concern I should be aware of. My supervisor, a man I had worked with for 6 years, told me only that the site was being transferred to another jurisdiction and that my involvement was concluded. His voice was flat, careful. I asked what jurisdiction. He said he could not discuss it further. I packed my equipment in the dark. The station was empty. Dr. Reeves had not returned. Cole's vehicle was gone from the parking area. I loaded my samples into the cooler in my truck and drove back to the highway. In my rearview mirror, I saw no lights at the station, though the security light should have been on. The following Monday, I was reassigned to a Superfund review in Michigan and instructed to surrender all documentation and samples from the Iowa station to a courier I did not recognize. He arrived at my office at 8 in the morning with a locked case and a transfer receipt. I signed it. He took the cooler, my field notes, my photographs, and the seismograph data card. He did not say who he worked for. The research station was listed as temporarily closed for infrastructure repairs in November, and my access credentials for that region were permanently revoked without further explanation. I saw the notice in an internal bulletin. No timeline for reopening was provided. I checked the EPA database in January and found that all records of my September visit had been removed. My quarterly reports for that year showed only 2 entries, June and December. September was gone. Story number 3, Cargo Manifest. I arrived at the Federal Evidence Warehouse outside Baltimore on a Tuesday morning in late September to conduct the routine quarterly inventory of archived materials from closed cases spanning 2007 through 2012. The facility sat behind a chain-link perimeter on a service road that most GPS systems did not recognize. I had been assigned the inventory because my clearance level matched the classification tier of the stored materials, and because I had performed similar audits at 3 other sites without incident. The facility manager, a man named Carver who had worked federal logistics for 16 years, met me at the security checkpoint. He walked me through the standard briefing while we moved through the access corridors. He mentioned, in passing, that overnight motion sensors had triggered twice in Wing C, which houses biological evidence in cold storage. But security footage showed nothing, and the system was flagged for maintenance. He said it that way, as though it were routine. I noted it in my field book, but did not ask follow-up questions. Wing C was a long rectangular space with 12 cold storage units along the north wall, each the size of a small walk-in freezer. The air smelled like disinfectant, and something else, faint and organic, that I could not place. I began the physical count at 0900 hours, working left to right, checking bag tags against the printed manifest. The work was methodical. I had done it many times before. During the physical count, I noticed that 17 evidence bags containing tissue samples from unrelated cases had identical handwritten notations in the margin. The notation was small, written in blue ink, and read, "Confirm viability prior to transfer." None of the notations matched the original chain of custody documentation, which I cross-referenced on my tablet. The cases themselves were unrelated. Different states, different years, different investigating agencies. There was no reasonable explanation for the identical phrasing or the identical handwriting. When I cross-referenced the bag numbers against the digital manifest, the system returned no records for those specific items, though the physical tags bore valid federal case numbers and proper seals. The tags were not counterfeit. I checked the embossing, the serial format, the tamper strip. Everything was correct. But according to the database, those bags did not exist. I contacted my supervisor per protocol. The call went through, and I was placed on hold. While I waited, I stood near the glass front of Cold Storage Unit 7 and observed condensation forming on the interior of the glass in patterns that repeated across multiple units. The patterns were geometric, small branching lines that resembled root systems or veins, but organized, deliberate, not consistent with temperature differential. I watched them form and fade over the course of 3 minutes. They appeared on units 4, 7, 9, and 12. Always the same configuration. The facility manager attempted to pull archive security footage from the dates the samples were logged. I asked him to do this while I was still on hold. He accessed the system from a terminal near the loading dock and told me, after several minutes, that every recording from that 6-month period had been administratively wiped with a clearance level above both our access grades. He showed me the screen. The entries were there, but the files themselves had been overwritten. The authorization code was not one either of us recognized. I made the decision to photograph the handwritten notations and the condensation patterns before proceeding, which was outside standard inventory procedure but seemed necessary given the inconsistencies. I used my agency-issued phone, not a personal device. I took 11 photographs in total. I documented the bag numbers, the notations, and the patterns on the glass. I did not know what I was documenting, but I understood that the situation had moved outside normal parameters. My supervisor returned my call 4 hours later. I had continued the inventory in the meantime, completing wings A and B without issue. When he called, I summarized what I had found. He listened without interrupting. Then he instructed me to complete the inventory using only the digital manifest, to exclude the 17 unrecorded items from my report, and to flag Wing C for decommissioning review. He did not ask about the photographs. He did not ask about the condensation. He told me to finish the work and submit the report by end of business. I followed the instructions. The final inventory was filed as complete with no discrepancies. I wrote that Wing C showed signs of environmental control failure and recommended a facilities assessment. I did not mention the 17 bags. I did not mention the notations or the patterns. The report was accepted without revision. The 17 bags were relocated to a different facility by personnel I did not recognize. They arrived 6 days later in an unmarked transport vehicle. They wore federal identification, but no agency insignia. Carver told me they spent 40 minutes in Wing C and left with 2 sealed containers. He did not ask what was inside, neither did I. Wing C was emptied and sealed within 10 days. I was not present for the decommissioning. I received an email notification that the wing had been cleared and that all materials had been transferred or destroyed per retention policy. The email did not specify which. I was reassigned to document review for the following 2 quarters and have not returned to that location. My photographs were remotely deleted from the agency's server 8 weeks after I submitted the inventory report. I received no explanation. The deletion was logged as part of a routine data purge, though my other files from that period were not affected. The case file for the inventory audit was archived under administrative closure. No further action required.